What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tomatolito Boxing Show. And wow, we are a couple days removed from the event that was the trilogy between Saul CANELO Alvarez and Gennadiy G Golovkin. It was a fun card, and it was a fun fight. It was a very telling fight in which many storylines came out when the fight concluded. And we're going to go ahead and review all of it. I mentioned that it was a fun card because it was full of up-and-coming fighters that are starting to settle themselves into the bigger ranks, fighters that are starting to make a name for themselves, and fighters that are up-and-coming fighting seasoned fighters, I guess. I was going to say older fighters, but I chose my word carefully, more seasoned fighters. So we look at this, and some of the fights that stood out to me on the undercard, Mark Castro. Mark Castro has been featured on numerous DAZN events. Mark Castro ended up putting away Kevin Mendoza. He improves to 8 victories now. He's 8-0 with 6 knockouts, and this was another great knockout for Mark Castro. We go back. He's out of Fresno, of course. He's a fun fighter to watch, and I've been watching. I think I've seen every single one of his 8 victories, and he looks good. He keeps getting tested a little bit more, and he's not on a fast route, which is a good thing for him. But he is definitely moving along very well. Somebody else that caught my attention. The Benavides camp at Phoenix, they have a lot of up-and-coming firefighters out of their firefighters, and I mean it in the sense of boxing. They get into these phone booth style firefights. Several of them are quick-handed, punches and bunches with possessing good power, and of course I'm talking about Rayo Valenzuela. Here's another young kid who is doing good, and that's Diego Pacheco. Diego Pacheco ended up putting away Enrique Colazo, and it was a fun fight as well. That was a 5-round fight, 5th-round victory for him. Diego Pacheco improves to 16-0 with 13 knockouts, and well, he's a super middleweight. He's a 168-pounder, tall, lanky, skinny young kid who's still building into his own body, still coming into his own, but very good skills and very good instincts already. At his young age. He was fun to watch, and the Benavides camp is going to be one to reckon with, of course, because of David Benavides. But these young fighters that are coming out of there, they're going to be something to reckon with here in the next couple years. So let's keep an eye out on them. Then the seasoned fighter that I'm speaking about was Gabe Rosado. Gabe Rosado, of course, he definitely is, I would say, past his prime. He's seen his best days. And nonetheless, he continues to be a tough test for anybody who steps in the ring with them. We see Gabe Rosado have a good fight, have a great fight, then have a couple fights where he doesn't look so good. And nonetheless, he's still a fun fighter to watch. He's a fan favorite style fighter for boxing, or at least in MMA. I could compare him to maybe like a Mike Perry. Gabe Rosado is going to give you everything. He's going to give you a gutsy performance each time out. He bleeds, he cuts, and he refuses to go down. He refuses to be taken out. He's been in the ring with the likes of Gennadiy Golovkin, with the likes of Danny Jacobs, Jaime Munguia more recently. You name it. He's been in with the who's who. On this occasion, he was facing Ali Akhmedov, who's an up-and-coming Kazakh fighter, and Ali Akhmedov is 19, improved to 19-1 with the victory over Rosado. 14 knockouts to his favor. Of course, his loss was a knockout loss, and that was against Carlos Gongora back in 2020, December of 2020. So he has decent names in his resume, Gabe Rosado being the biggest and most notorious name on that resume. Now, he was unable to put him away, but he was able to be victorious, and it was pretty one-sided the way that Akhmedov did it. Now, with that said, when you face craftier seasoned fighters like a Gabe Rosado, it's For me, I have fun watching those fights when it's an up-and-coming fighter, someone who's starting to build a name for themselves. They're starting to climb up the ranks, because it's very telling when they're facing a seasoned fighter, whether they get caught into any of the little trickery, I guess, that the seasoned fighters will be able to possess, whether it be the punch and grab, whether it be the baiting in of one sort or another, the smack talk, mental game, you name it. It's fun to watch that. And Gabe Rosado, as he started doing it to Akhmedov, right around the third, fourth round, he starts talking, he starts blabbing away at Akhmedov, nodding his head at him, smirking at him, using hand gestures, I guess, obviously with the glove, no specific finger gestures, but waving him with the glove and putting his hands up wide and so forth, right? So he started playing a little bit of mental warfare with Akhmedov, and Akhmedov started acknowledging it. He started smirking himself. Even later in the rounds, he started smirking and smiling back at Gabe Rosado, almost as if he was being challenged. And that's something telling for me, because his only loss in his resume is one where mental games had to be played, right? And he got bested. He got baited in. Gabe Rosado was baiting him in. And for a split second there, when Akhmedov's giving in, he started not looking so great. Eventually, he settled back into his game plan, realized that he was getting baited into something that was not so favorable for him, and the corner ended up acknowledging it as well, because they fixed his game plan, and he fixed his fighting style, not being so wild, and well, he ended up coming out with the victory. Gabe Rosado, very crafty and very tricky veteran to face with. Regardless of who's across the ring, they're going to get the very best of King Gabe. And he's always fun to watch. He's definitely in the latter stages of his career. Commentary was that this potentially is his last fight. We'll see. We'll see where he goes from here. He's in shape. He's obviously past his prime because his reflexes, his instincts are gone, but he's still in shape. He still possesses power, and he still possesses a threat to many of the fighters out there. Who else? From there, we ended up going to the other fight that caught, well, this one caught my eye as well. This one was definitely an entertaining fight. Austin Williams. Before I jump into the co-main event, Ammo Williams and Kieran Conway put on a great matchup. Very evenly matched. Kieran Conway was standing tall, fighting tall, with a very stiff jab that he was landing on Ammo Williams. Ammo Williams a little bit more elusive and fighting in different angles, throwing punches in different angles, and eventually he ended up coming out with the victory, and he ended up landing a knockdown on Kieran Conway there during the fight, and that was round 9, I believe, when he ended up dropping Conway. It was a questionable knockdown, but a knockdown nonetheless, and Ammo Williams definitely came away with the victory there, with the unanimous decision. Then we move on to the co-main event. And this co-main event is something that I was looking forward to. Not at the same level, obviously, as the main event, but it had my intrigue. It had my interest because Bam Rodriguez is on the verge of possibly being named the fighter of the year after his last 2 victories this year. If you haven't been following the Bam Rodriguez surge onto the boxing scene and onto the boxing world and onto the headlines of the boxing world, go back and look at his body of work this year. A Robert Garcia trained fighter. Bam Rodriguez stepped in with a week or so notice to face Carlos Cuadras earlier this year, a fight that I actually happened to be at in Phoenix, Arizona. I attended it, and it was one that I bought tickets because it was Saul Rungvisai against Príncipe Cuadras. Carlos Cuadras and Saul Rungvisai, 2 of the 4 new age 4 kings, or this generation's 4 kings, as they've been named multiple times. Of course, I'm talking about Chocolatito, Gallo Estrada, Carlos Cuadras, and Saul Rungvisai. Okay, Saul Rungvisai, Cuadras, scheduled to face off against one another for the WBC title, a rematch in their own right. Saul Rungvisai falls to illness. He ends up falling out of the bout due to being ill. Bam Rodriguez steps in with a week and a half notice, moves up in weight. He fights at a lower weight. He moved up in weight, a weight that his brother Joshua Franco fights at and is a current champion at. He steps up, moves up in weight, last minute notice, and faces Carlos Cuadras. The masterful class that Bam Rodriguez put on in the show that he put on that night, where not only does he drop Cuadras, but he outpoints him, he outsmarts him, and he outclasses the crafty veteran in Cuadras, was the reason why the ascension of Bam Rodriguez caught so many eyes. And he shook up that entire division. Like I said, his brother Joshua Franco, with those famous fights that he actually had against Maloney, the Australian fighter. Those were great fights. Those were ESPN fights. Bam Rodriguez just stole the imagination of the boxing world with what he was able to do against a crafty veteran like Carlos Cuadras, a fight that was supposed to be Sor Rungvisai. With several weeks down the line, we were going to have the other two of the four kings facing off against each other, Gallo Estrada and Chocolatito. This is earlier this year. Sor Rungvisai falls out, Bam steps in, beats Cuadras, takes the title from him. Several weeks later, Gallo Estrada, similar to Sor Rungvisai, falls out of his fight. He ends up falling out due to contracting COVID. Chocolatito's left without a dance partner, and on a similar type move, Julio Cesar Martinez, steps up to the plate to face Chocolatito, and once basically motivated from what Bam had just done, the world is even more in tune with this fight because he was bound to shock the old crafty veteran in Chocolatito. It didn't pan out that way for him. Chocolatito showed him that there's classes in this sport, and the elite level of Chocolatito proved to be too much for Cesar Martinez. Chocolatito ends up getting his hand raised at the end of that night, and then we move on to hopefully try to reschedule the fight against Gallo Estrada. Bam Rodriguez, several months later, a few months ago, ends up facing none other than Sor Rungvisai, the opponent whom he replaced against Carlos Cuadras, and the opponent who is known as one of the four kings, along with Cuadras, Estrada, Chocolatito. This was definitely going to be too much for Bam to take on. Enter Bam Rodriguez, outpoints, outsmarts, outpunches, outclasses, and even stops Sor Rungvisai. Leaves Sor Rungvisai dead on his tracks, retains his WBC title that he lifted from Cuadras. Now he's got two of the kings under his resume. And the emergence of Bam Rodriguez, the surge that Bam Rodriguez, the arrival of Bam Rodriguez to the boxing world, not just to the superflies, but to the boxing world, is second to none. So, of course, he was going to be in a good spot to be headlining another event, or guess what? He got called to co-main none other than a big CANELO weekend, Mexican Independence Weekend, and the big CANELO card, which draws millions and millions of eyes, and he was going to be the co-main events. His opponent, Israel Gonzalez, lesser known to most people. So people thought this was going to be a walk in the park. If you look at Israel Gonzalez's record as he steps in here, he steps into the ring with 4 defeats to a Bam Rodriguez who was 16-0 stepping into the ring with the title. Third fight of the year for Bam Rodriguez. Israel Gonzalez, the lesser known Mexican fighter, was no joke. And going into this fight, that's the reason that I was so interested about this, because there's only one man that has stopped Israel Gonzalez, and that was former Superfly champ Jerwin Ancajas. The Filipino star Jerwin Ancajas actually lost his title earlier this year, and he is scheduled here in a couple weeks' time to defend it. To try to regain his title. So he's going to be in a rematch. Jerwin Ancajas is going to be in a rematch against Fernando Daniel Martinez, who took the title from him, and that was back in February also. So now the rematch is happening October 8th, and I can't wait to see that fight because that was a fun fight the first go around, and we'll see if Jerwin Ancajas is past his days, or if he's going to retain his title and be one of the big dogs in this division, continue to be one of the big dogs in this division. So let's talk about Israel Gonzalez. He had 4 losses going into this and 1 draw. his 4 defeats, his first defeat came at the hands of Argy Cortez. If you don't recognize that name, or if you recognize that name and you can't really put your finger on it, well, Argy Cortez was just in action against none other than Gallo Estrada a week ago. And he gave him everything that he could handle and then some. He posed many problems for Gallo Estrada and gave him a really, really tough fight. Gallo Estrada ends up coming out with a decision victory in the end, and the provisional date for December between Gallo Estrada's trilogy with Chocolatito was on the brink because of how tough of a fight Argy Cortez was giving him. And then Gallo Estrada ends up pulling out the victory, and they were able to announce the trilogy at the conclusion of that fight. The trilogy between Gallo and Chocolatito is now slated to take place this coming December. That's Argy Cortez. That was a unanimous decision loss for Gonzalez against Argy Cortez. That was back in 2016. We move on to his second loss, which was a stoppage loss to Jerwin Ancajas. That was the only opponent that has beat Gonzalez, and the only opponent that beat Gonzalez that was able to stop him. Then we move on to Khalid Yafai. Khalid Yafai was on an ascension, British boxer Khalid Yafai on an ascension like no other, who was in his best moments. He went into that fight 24-0 against Israel Gonzalez back in 2019, or 2018. Let me look this up here. November 24th, 2018, when they faced off against each other. Khalid Yafai was 24-0 going into that fight. Of course, Israel Gonzalez had a really good record at that time with only 2 defeats, 1 stoppage to Jerwin, and his loss to Argy Cortez, his first defeat to Argy. Khalid Yafai beats him by unanimous decision. Moves on to, if you don't know who Khalid Yafai was, well, look up Khalid Yafai. He was lining up really, really good victories. When he faced Gonzalez 24-0, he goes on to become 25-0. And on his 26th fight, actually, I'm wrong. I'm 1 victory off. When he beat Gonzalez, he became 25-0. He became 26-0 1 fight later. And on his 27th fight, he faced none other than Chocolatito Gonzalez. A Chocolatito Gonzalez that went in there and stopped him in round 9. That was February of 2020, and Khalid Yafai has not fought since. His record still sits at 26-1, with that 1 loss being a knockout loss to Chocolatito, 15 of the victories by knockout. That's who Israel Gonzalez has faced leading up to this. Then he had a loss to Chocolatito Gonzalez, the same man that put a stop to Khalid Yafai. There we go. And that was a unanimous decision loss. So the only man that could put him away was Jerwin Ancajas. Argy Cortez, who just gave Gallo Estrada a hell of a fight a week ago, holds a decision victory over Gonzalez. Chocolatito holds a decision victory over Gonzalez. Khalid Yafai holds a decision victory over Gonzalez. And there was a majority draw between him and Jose Martinez Mercado back in 2021, March of 21. So he leads into this fight on a 2-fight win streak. And enter Bam Rodriguez. The experience, the amount of experience that Israel Gonzalez brought to the ring. And for those people who thought it was going to be a walk in the park, they ended up being shocked, because Israel Gonzalez and Bam Rodriguez fought your traditional Mexican style phone booth type fight. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. A lot of punches being thrown and a lot of punches being connected by both parties. Bam Rodriguez had a tough task in his hands. And if he was going to be the main event, the co-main event for a Canelo fight, he needed to pull this fight out. He needed it. And now he remains. He did pull it out. He remains on track to be the fighter of the year for this year. Impressive victories against really, really good opposition all year. And he ended up pulling it out in the late rounds as he began to pressure Israel Gonzalez, walk forward, pressure Gonzalez with combinations, and refused to give ground, sticking to his ground, maintaining his ground, his position, and not only would he open the offensive with combinations, but would stand his ground with whatever Gonzalez would throw back and counter immediately. And that accumulation of punches began to push Gonzalez back, began to get the rounds for Bam Rodriguez, including a knockdown that took place in the 8th round. Was it the 8th round? I'm getting it confused between the 8th and 9th, but I believe it was the 8th round where Gonzalez goes down and they end up deducting a point. And I think there was 2 successions where this happened, right? There was a point that was deducted from Bam Rodriguez for, as they deemed it, that it was a low blow, and Gonzalez went down. So they deducted 1 point from Bam Rodriguez. And then there was a second succession, I think it was in the 9th round, where that ended up happening. The second one, you could correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm off by a round or so. But on the second time, Gonzalez takes a knee. The referee doesn't acknowledge a knockdown and doesn't deduct the point. Gonzalez is claiming that it was another low blow. We have a 10 to 15 second, 20 second pause there as Gonzalez is taking a knee. And it was a little bit confusing because the referee just allowed Gonzalez to get back on his feet and the fight to resume. That should have been an awarded knockdown if they weren't going to deduct a point for it being a low blow. This guy's on his knee. What happened to him? Was there an infraction committed against him, or did he get hurt and we have a knockdown now? What was it? The referee never cleared it up, let the fight go on, and we had missed points there. That would have even secured a wider victory for Bam Rodriguez. The scorecards were a little bit off because they gave him a landslide victory, in which it wasn't a landslide victory. This was a closer victory than the scores read. But nonetheless, Bam Rodriguez pulls out this victory and remains undefeated. Bam Rodriguez improves to 17-0, 11 knockouts, retains the title, well en route to become the fighter of the year. And we'll wait to see what happens between Gallo Estrada and Chocolatito in December. I don't know if we're going to see Bam Rodriguez active again between now and December. It would be great if we did, but if we don't, then because he may very well fight maybe Jerwin Ancajas if he becomes if he's victorious against Martinez. That would be pretty cool if we see that fight. Or Martinez himself, if he retains the title and is unable to beat Jerwin Ancajas. I mean, yeah, if he's able to retain his title by beating Jerwin Ancajas. So I'm getting a little tongue-tied. So Fernando Daniel Martinez, if he retains the title, can we see a Mexican brawl? This is October, so December, 2-month wait. I don't think it's going to happen. Bam Rodriguez more than likely will be sitting out the remainder of the year because I'm looking at the date October 8th, that Ancajas and Martinez fight. We've seen crazier things, right? And he's been stepping in on a 1 to 2 week notice. Bam has. We'll see. Depending on how much damage Martinez and Ancajas take, Ancajas wins. That would be an awesome fight to take. But then again, you have his brother, Joshua Franco, also fighting in this division. So they're both going to want the smoke on all these fighters. Cuadras, Sarung Visay, Israel Gonzalez, impressive resume, impressive road victories that Bam Rodriguez put together in 2022. Might as well just sit it out and wait to see how the Gallo Estrada Chocolatito trilogy turns out so he could try to go after the winner of those guys and take on a third of the 4 kings in that Superfly division. We move on to the main event. The mega event that was this trilogy between Canelo and Golovkin. And you have a ton of mixed reviews from people saying that it was a disappointment, from people saying that it was a sleeper of a fight, that it was boring, that it was this, that it was that. I don't know about you. I thought it was a good back and forth fight. There's people saying that Canelo gassed again. I didn't see it. He was throwing combinations and fighting very well all the way to the 12th round. I didn't see it. Was it a landslide victory? It was fairly one-sided. Canelo showed up very determined, but he didn't outpunch himself like he did in the first fight, where he outpunches himself and then gasses out. You've seen numerous people, and you could find the interviews yourself, go on YouTube, go on many forums of social media, people saying that Canelo is a typical Canelo, that he gassed out, people claiming that he's reached his peak, and it's the same Canelo that we see time and again now. Listen, if this is the same Canelo and you're saying that he peaked already, great. But to say that he's not going to improve, this Canelo, this version of Canelo is giving headaches to everybody. And the one argument that you could make is that he did gas out against Dimitri Bivol this past May. Todd Grisham made the comment, I believe it was around round 7 or round 8, where he said, we have a Canelo coming off a loss, and it's almost, and I'm going to say, I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but it was along these lines where he basically says, coming off the loss, we have a new Canelo and an old Triple G. In other words, like a new and invigorated Canelo, and not an old version of Triple G, but an older. Not a Triple G of yesteryear where he was performing like that, but an old in age Triple G. And it was so telling when he mentioned that, because you could tell there was glimpses there of what we saw before with De La Hoya. We've seen it with Cotto. We've seen it with Manny Pacquiao a year ago against Ugas. We've seen it with numerous fighters where they just can't pull the Amir Khan, Kell Brook earlier this year. They just can't pull the trigger. It's almost like Golovkin could see the angles. He saw the openings, but he just wasn't throwing. He just wasn't throwing at the beginning of the fight. I'm gonna post my scorecard how I had it, and you guys could discuss it with me. Leave me a comment. I post everything on Instagram, my Instagram page. Follow the Tomatolito Boxing Show there, and you can see the scorecards whenever I get to score a fight, and I get to focus in on the fight. I go ahead and post those cards. I had it 116. 112, and I gave the rounds to Canelo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, and 12 to Canelo. I gave Golovkin rounds 7, 8, 9, and 11. I saw the tide start switching in the favor of Golovkin, at least him doing enough to switching his momentum after Jonathan Banks told him numerous times, you need to be more active. You need to start letting your hands go. You need to start putting more pressure. And Golovkin started turning the tide in round 6, but didn't do enough to win that round. Round 7 was another questionable one, but I saw, and Canelo ended up defending himself really, really good in round 7 as well. I almost leaned on the side of giving it to Canelo, but I thought Golovkin did enough to stand his ground, and I felt that he was starting to switch momentum in his favor. In round 8, it was a good firefight between the two. So for those of you saying that Canelo was gassed down the stretch, look at round 8 and round 9. They were going back and forth with each other, but Golovkin landed multiple uppercuts and landed multiple punches of note, enough to me that seemed like he was starting to switch the tide. That's why I gave Golovkin those rounds. Was it enough to have gotten him the victory? Not on this night. Is it an older Triple G? Yes. The claims that Triple G ended up fighting to survive, to not be embarrassed, to not get knocked out. Who knows? But that's not what I saw. I saw him in there. I saw him engaging. Yes, he was heavily marked up by the end of the first round and even by the start of the second round with those power punches that Canelo was throwing. Canelo spent so much energy throwing so many power shots, including power shots to the body, which he said he was going to do. He was going to try to exploit the body. He landed multiple hits to the body, especially to the hips. And this is something that we noticed between Triple G, where he had trouble with Ryota Murata earlier this year. He actually got hurt, and you could see him grimacing against Ryota Murata if you watch that fight on several occasions from Murata's punches. But he managed to stop Murata. He managed to continue with his jab. That's the one flaw that I saw with Golovkin on this fight. He abandoned his jab. I don't know what the strategy was. So there's numerous things that popped in my head, and immediately when the fight ended, I was asking myself, did he try to gas Canelo out and it backfired on him? Did he try to wait Canelo out until the later rounds, thinking that this was going to be similar to their first event, to their first fight, and then start capitalizing down the stretch? If that was it, that's why we got this result, because it failed. Canelo was active from beginning to end. more so at the beginning of the fight, but he was definitely still throwing combinations and countering really, really good and throwing some really heavy leather down the final rounds. So you can't, I call BS on people saying that he gassed out. Not this version of Canelo. Then again, you didn't have a heavily pressure fighter in Golovkin. In round 11, Golovkin came out firing. And I mean, it was glimpses of the old Golovkin that had faced Canelo in the first and second fight, and the old Golovkin that we're used to. He was just invigorated in that round, and that's why I gave him that round. He started that round heavy, and just going at him. And landed some really, really good punches and also got hit with some punches, but I think he did enough to have won that round, and I gave it to him. Golovkin, did he survive? Did he just cruise to avoid getting knocked out and embarrassed in front of everybody? I don't think so. I mean, that's a claim that people are saying. Go back and watch the fight and tell me what you think. I don't think he did enough just to survive and cruise by and avoid the knockout. He was there. He got hit with a lot of heavy hits, and he kept coming at Canelo. I saw a trigger shy, I saw a hesitant Golovkin, I saw a very calculated Golovkin, almost as if he was saving his own gas tank or conserving his gas tank. He was very careful with his punches, and he couldn't find Canelo when he was ready to deliver his punches on numerous occasions. So that ended up posing a problem for him. The critics of Canelo, if they're saying that this is the peak Canelo and that he's not going to get any better and this and that, listen, he doesn't, in my eyes, his style is posing so many problems for his opponents to date that if he improves, it's going to be masterful to see. But he's mixing up his attacks, body to head, flowing. He's able to counter punch. He's able to move. He's got good head movement, good hip movement, good combinations, good reads, good feints. I mean, he seems pretty. Is he flawless? No, of course not, because he's got a couple defeats now. And quite possibly, I'll agree with you. He should have lost that first fight. We discussed it on the previous show as I put the scorecards, and you could go back and see the old scorecards. And I told you guys when I posted that episode, you owe it to yourself. Go back and rewatch these fights leading into such a big fight like this, because let's refresh it. Let's keep it fresh in our head. Let's see what each fighter was doing better, and we'll be able to analyze this trilogy even tighter at that, or even with a finer eye once you get to see what each fighter was, the threats that they were posing for one another in the first two encounters. 24 rounds between these two. Not a single knockdown. All judges' decisions. Not a single knockdown in this one. Now there's 36 rounds between the two. Not a single knockdown between the two, but just heavy exchanges, a lot of ebb and flow, a lot of give and take, and a lot of controversy, especially because of the judges' decisions. On this one, the argument was on the side of Canelo that people almost robbed the fight for Canelo. People saying that it was a 10-2, that it was a 9-3, that it was blah, 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 right? This is how I scored it, 16-12. One of the judges had it 16-12. The 15-13 scorecards, meaning that if one of those rounds would have been given to Golovkin, this could have been a draw, or both of those judges could have called this a draw, and this would have been a split decision for Canelo with the 16-12. Those cards were a little ridiculous. Was it a landslide victory for Canelo? No. But it was fairly one-sided. It wasn't all 12 rounds for Canelo, but it was fairly one-sided for a majority of the fight until later in the rounds. And that's where you start questioning what the game plan was that Golovkin had in his mind versus what Jonathan Banks was trying to get him to implement. So there was confusion there on that camp. On the Canelo camp, he fought from beginning to end, something that people have criticized him for not doing. He fought from beginning to end, so I don't understand where those arguments are coming from, or those critiques that he gassed out. I didn't see that. You tell me if you did. I didn't see it. Point out the round and tell me when, because I didn't see that. Great fight for Canelo, great fight for the boxing world, and overall, was it the most epic of fights? No. But you can't tell me that these three fights were not entertaining. You can't tell me that they didn't grab the attention of the boxing world and people were tuning in. I mean, you look at the people that were in attendance and you look at how big of an event this became alongside the first two times that they faced each other. 5 years ago and 4 years ago, and it still kept the same amount of attention, if not more, in a sold-out crowd once again, with heavier ticket prices and pay-per-view prices than ever. The business was there, the marketing was there, the market was there, the fan base was there in welcoming this fight. And the Golovkin fans, they have nothing to be ashamed of. Like Golovkin said, he still has 3 titles at 160. Of course, 2 of those are major sanctioning body titles. One of them is the IBO title, which is not heavily recognized, but nonetheless, there's a title there. That's a title that Usyk has right now. That also one of the titles that he took from Anthony Joshua, the IBO title. But Usyk technically has 3 major sanctioning body titles, with Tyson Fury having the 4th. This is the same case here. Charlo has a WBC. Gennadiy just got elevated to the WBO since Andre vacated and is moving up to 168. And IBF, WBA are with Triple G. Now, we look at this fight, the back and forth between these 2 fighters. It looks like the animosity's gone. It looks like everything came to an end somewhat amicably. And that's it. It was a great event. It was a great fight with great punches. If anything, there was a lot of action in this fight. And the telling stories between this was not just what we've been talking about, but now, where does Canelo go from here? People are still asking for Canelo to fight Jermall Charlo, a fighter who doesn't campaign at 168. Why? I don't see that. Why? Why do you guys want to fight a fight with Jermall Charlo and Canelo Alvarez? Nothing interesting to me about that fight. Same thing for Demetrius Andrade. Nothing interesting for me about that fight. He just vacated a title. He's nowhere in the picture, either 160 or 168 now, until he gets settled again. Why? Now, there's a David Benavidez fight, who holds the interim WBC title at the same division as Canelo. There's David Morrell, who I feel like has no business in the ring with Canelo, and he holds the regular world WBA title to Canelo's super champion WBA title. But he's a few victories in his professional career. Yes, very decorated amateur. A few victories in, he has no business with Canelo. But neither did Avni Yildirim. So those are those 2 fights. So Canelo's going to chase the rematch with Bivol, should it still be there after November, if Bivol is successful against Zurdo Ramirez. That's no easy task. Zurdo's going into this undefeated. Zurdo's at the best moment in his career right now. Canelo said it out loud that he's cheering, even though Zurdo's called out Canelo numerous times in the past. Canelo's cheering for him as a fellow Mexican. So I don't see what other fight is available for Canelo there. Not yet, but let it materialize. What fights can we make at 168 to determine a sole opponent for Canelo in that division? David Benavidez has the strongest claim. I would like to see David Benavidez fight David Morrell, lift that title from David Morrell. I really believe that David Benavidez would be too much for David Morrell. I want to see David Benavidez and Caleb Plant. They have a history there. Those would be 2 fights. Meanwhile, Canelo's going to be out for a while with the hand surgery. Those would be 2 fights that David Benavidez could do between now and May, and potentially have a September showdown next year in 2023 with Canelo. Get David Morrell out of the way, lift that title from him, and get Caleb Plant in the ring with you. I don't know why Jermall Charlo keeps getting mentioned at 168 when he is the WBC champ at 160. Leave Charlo out of this. Charlo has tried to get this. I guess there was talks that there was negotiations there. That's just somewhat of a money fight. But it sucks that he would skip in the line above all other fighters that continue to fight and move up the ranks to face a Canelo and have their rightful shot at the title. So I want to eliminate those. The other one would be Ilunga Makabu, right? For the cruiserweight title, which was mentioned before. And that was supposed to be the December fight this year. But with that left hand injury to Canelo, and he's saying he's going straight to surgery, we're more than likely not going to see Canelo the rest of this year until maybe early 2023 in a lead up to May. We might not see him until May for the Cinco de Mayo weekend. But that was the other fight that was there when he was trying to challenge himself up at cruiserweight with the current WBC champ and the only big money ticket that Don King is currently holding on to. And the fighter that has a big major title at cruiserweight. Bivol Zurdo seems to be the biggest fight for Canelo right now, since he continues to want to try his hand at the next division. Benavidez seems to be the most reasonable at the super middleweight, as everybody else is just coming onto the picture. So let's see. Let's see if Andrade actually fights Zack Ryder at WBO for that WBO at 168. And if should he be victorious, or Zack Ryder himself, hey, you got somebody else now in the mix, and you continue to go there. You got Akhmedov, who's starting to move in. You got Edgar Berlanga, who's starting to move in. But let's see Berlanga, a big name against David Benavidez, or Berlanga challenge David Morrell. Both of those seem to be in similar spots in their careers at the moment. That would be entertaining. Or David Benavidez just unify all the smaller versions to the titles and leave zero questions of who needs to be stepping into the ring with Canelo. But there has to be some proof of work. There has to be some proof of work. David Benavidez is definitely the strongest argument out there, and the strongest fighter to have an argument to face Canelo right now. But he's an interim champ because Canelo's holding that title right now. And there's other fights to be made. And I have no doubts that David Benavidez is the strongest 168 pounder right now, aside from Canelo. I think he beats Caleb Plant. And I would definitely put my money on David Benavidez against a Demetrius Andrade and a David Morrell. As much as I like David Morrell, his ascension, I think the PBC, and I keep saying it in previous episodes, the PBC did a disservice to David Morrell because they're picking his fights perfectly, but they wanted to have their own version of a Lomachenko. They wanted a fighter with a decorated amateur record, fighting for a title quickly into their pro career, which they did for David Morrell. And I think he won his title when he was 1-0 or 2-0. He won this title. He's been defending it. His opposition continues to get better, but there is a lot of holes and a lot of room for improvement for David Morrell in the pro ranks. I don't think he needs to be in there with Canelo, but he could definitely be in there with the David Benavidez. Since he's holding a title, he might as well step in against somebody who has a similar version, similar style, similar version title than he does, right? Benavidez with the interim, Morrell with the regular world version to the WBA title. I mean, that's it. Who's the IBF runner-up? Who's the WBO runner-up? That's what remains to be seen, but there's other names there. Jermall Charlo, leave him out of this argument. Jermall Charlo, I just heard someone say that he doesn't warrant a match against Gennadiy Golovkin, and that is complete absurdity to me. If anyone needs to be in that ring against Gennadiy Golovkin, and if that fight needs to be made at any point, it needs to be made now. Gennadiy Golovkin is at a crossroads moment right now where he's dwindling down on his career. He's in the final 2-3 fights of his career. He is an older fighter. But what are we going to see from Gennadiy Golovkin against a Jermall Charlo? We'll see a 12-round. Even though he says he's not a 12-round fighter anymore, he is. Now he just needs to fight a different style fight. Instead of emptying his tank early and throwing everything at his opponent and trying to get him out, now he needs to be a little bit more methodical and trust his boxing, because he boxes beautifully. Stand behind his jab, which he abandoned this past Saturday. Live by the jab, die by the jab, just like he used to the majority of his career. And he would generate the openings by way of his jab and eliminate his opponents that way, stopping him. Because of his jab, he would generate the combinations and the power punches and get his opponents down and out. He needs to go back to that. Gennadiy Golovkin and Jermall Charlo would be the most intriguing fight in my eyes at 160. Now, it looks like the WBA is going to move forward with Erislandy Lara, who holds the world version. He's similar in the similar position as David Morrell is at 168. Well, he holds that the WBA regular world title to Gennadiy's super champion title, which he lifted off Murata earlier this year. So looks like the WBA is going to be moving forward, trying to set that fight up between Lara and Golovkin. Very, very good fight of two very seasoned fighters. Lara and Golovkin would be very interesting to me because Lara's not in his prime anymore, but he's still performing very well. But he's been performing very well against lesser known opposition. Against a Gennadiy Golovkin would be a big fight for him. He had his toughest fights at 154. He's had light opposition at 160. This would be a great fight for Lara and a great resume should he be victorious over a Gennadiy Golovkin, and vice versa. This would be a great name for Gennadiy Golovkin to have in his resume as well as his career comes to a close. I would like to see Gennadiy Golovkin in these following fights. Erislandy Lara up next. Unify the WBA. Jermall Charlo. And should he be victorious, he would have 3 of the 4 major sanctioning titles. If he loses to a great up-and-coming fighter in Jermall Charlo. You guys know from my past episodes and when I reviewed his fights, I'm very big in the stock of Jermall Charlo because I believe in him. I like his style. I like how he fights versus that of his brother. I like Jermall Charlo with how he's able to switch up his attacks, and we just saw it with Brian Castaño in his 2 fights. He switches up his attacks. He's able to adapt to the boxer. Jermall Charlo fights different than Mel. Jermall Charlo he utilizes a jab, and it would be a battle of jabs between him and Golovkin. I would love to see that. Jermall Charlo begins his attacks by way of the jab, relies on the jab, and generates both offense and defense with his jab. He's able to get out. Whenever he's in trouble, he's able to get out and away from the opponent with his jab. He'll pat, and circle out of the way out of danger, or he'll generate his attack by initiating with the jab. Very, very interesting style that Jermall has. Very lengthy, very good at utilizing his reach, and has good pop behind his punches. Jermall and Golovkin would be the best fight that you could make at 160. So I would see Golovkin go after Lara, unify the WBA, Golovkin go with Jermall, however that fight turns out. But should Golovkin be successful against Charlo, the only other fight to make would be to go against his fellow countryman, his fellow Kazakh countryman, Gennadiy, for all the glory. His WBO title against Golovkin's 3 titles at that point. And it would be a massive payday. It would be massive boxing notoriety for the Kazakh people, for Kazakhstan boxing, and it would be a passing of the torch should Gennadiy be successful and victorious against Golovkin, or the best way for Golovkin to ride off into the sunset. Those 3 fights would be the ones that I see for Golovkin in the future, and that would be the last 3 fights that I would like to see him fight in and involved in. Now, if he loses to Charlo, guess what? Charlo and Gennadiy would be the fight to make, and that would be a firefight. That would be a firefight of 2 young boxers in their peak. Charlo's just around the corner from reaching his prime. Gennadiy is right there up and coming as as I keep calling them firefighters, and people keep thinking it's the profession, but it's not. It's just the style of fight that these guys, there's just a lot of fire when they're just heavy punchers and heavy action fighters. So that's the pathway for me to see Golovkin closing out his career. Am I putting him past Erislandy Lara? Without any disrespect towards Erislandy Lara, I think Golovkin would stop Lara. Lara would dance, move, get on his bicycle, evade it. But if Hurd was able to get to Lara, Golovkin will definitely get to him. Golovkin's older. He just has to rely on that jab, has to generate his attack, and he'll be able to catch Lara. Jermall, I think, would be the toughest of the 3 tests. And I don't see Lara unifying with Jermall Charlo. That's a former partner of his, former training partner. Remember that years ago, Lara used to be with Ronnie Shields, and he used to train with the Charlos in Houston when the Charlos were still up and coming and making a name for themselves. I don't see Lara getting in the ring with Jermall Charlo, so he's just going to sit on that version of the title that he has until either he vacates or decides to do something else. But I don't see him going after Gennadiy. I don't see him going after anybody else. So the WBA putting pressure on Lara, even though Lara calls out the big names. He wants a rematch with CANELO. He wants, you name it. But I don't see him getting in the ring with Charlo. I don't see him getting in the ring with Gennadiy. So the Golovkin fight would not only be a big payday for him, but it would be a big fight for both of them, a fight that both of them would wake up for and show up in a good version, hopefully a good version of each of their respective past prime, I guess, or their respective talents that we could see. Hopefully showing a good version of themselves. What an event, because it opened a lot of doors, it created a lot of questions, but it also answered a lot of questions, and we're in a good spot. We're in a good spot moving forward. Now we're just a few days away from Shakur Stevenson and Robson Conceição. I'll go ahead and put an episode together for you on that one. And then we got a heavyweight showdown between Parker and Joe Joyce, with now newly announced, or at least I just caught onto it, that Amanda Serrano is going to be part of that undercard as well, of Joe Joyce and Parker. So that's going to be something to look forward to as well. And a lot of good fights, as we get close to or as we enter the third quarter of this year. Or the latter part of 2022, and we usually tend to see some awesome fights as the year closes and dwindles down. So I'll put a couple more episodes out here for you. Another one that I'm working on, and we'll see if that one catches your attention at all, because it's an odd one. It caught my attention, but I'm definitely going to take it in one direction versus the normal direction that everybody seems to be following in. But I'll keep you posted on that. Don't forget to follow me. Thank you guys again for all the downloads. Thank you for all the love. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Toma Todito Boxing Show. You could comment on Instagram. Let me know what you think of the scorecard. Let me know if you think what you think of the rounds and the way I scored it. And you could also talk to me on Twitter. So we'll be active on there. Thank you for all the love. Thank you for all the support. Salud. Take care of yourself. Good night.